We're pleased to welcome Emily Truscott, who will guide us through dietary strategies to support your journey with MSA.
Also, don't forget there will be a live Q&A with Emily after this presentation. So please submit any questions using the Q&A function. Over to you, Emily.
Today I'll be presenting on nutrition and MSA and different diet strategies for symptom management. My name is Emily Truscott. I'm a clinical registered dietitian at the Cell Institute for Neurological Diseases at the University of Florida Health System. There I see patients with all kinds of nutritional concerns that have neurological diseases. I also contribute to the neuronutrition research and education initiatives of the Food Science and Human Nutrition Department at the University of Florida. My objectives for today's presentation is to provide you with practical strategies to improve your nutrition status and quality of life. I also want to empower you, your caregivers, and families with advice that you can actually put into action. It's one thing for me to tell you what to do, but I want to show you how to actually apply that to your life. And then I'll also highlight the importance of different team members when it comes to individualized care. Nutrition is sometimes overlooked when it comes to overall health, so I did want to touch on the importance of nutrition before we get into symptom management. Nutrition gives us energy throughout the day. The protein in our diet gives our muscles the strength that they need to get us moving throughout the day. It's important for immunity and recovery. So think about fighting off viruses and bacteria. It's important for muscle recovery after workouts. And it's also important for wound healing. The gut brain axis is something that's talked about a lot these days, and it is true that our gut influences our brain, and our brain influences our gut. A balanced diet that's rich in fiber, vitamins, and minerals can feed the good bacteria in our gut, which is associated with better brain health. So, nutrition is very important for overall well being. It helps regulate our mood and fuel all the systems in our bodies. You're likely aware that multiple system atrophy is a neurodegenerative disorder that's characterized by problems with movement, balance, and autonomic function. But we know MSA can have an impact in all aspects of your life. So I've highlighted a few areas here that nutrition can really play a role in. Food medication interaction. So some medications need to be taken on an empty stomach, and this can really impact the timing of your meals. There are some nutrition strategies that might help manage blood pressure problems. GI symptoms are common, so constipation and slow gastric emptying, and there are a few nutrition strategies we can use for these. Fatigue, so not having enough energy to eat the amount of food that you need to eat, can really impact your nutrition quality. And vice versa, your nutrition quality can really impact the amount of fatigue that you feel. Dysphagia or swallowing difficulty is another common symptom, and so there are nutrition strategies we can implement here, like changing the textures of foods. And then if you are losing weight without trying, that's a red flag that tells us that you're probably not getting the nutrients that you need. One of the biggest things that I look out for from a nutrition standpoint is malnutrition. Malnutrition is a lack of nutrition caused by not eating enough food, not eating enough of the right types of food, or your body's inability to use the foods that you're eating. People living with MSA are at an increased risk for malnutrition, and it's associated with poorer outcomes, especially with patients with the predominant Parkinsonian features. It's important to note that malnutrition can occur during even the early stages and in absence of decreased BMI. So that means that you might not see weight loss, but you could still be malnourished if you're not getting the right types of vitamins and minerals that you need. Before we get into symptom management, I do want to address one of the most common questions that I get, and that is, what should I be eating? So, unfortunately, research identifying a best diet for MSA is just not out there at this time. But what we do is we look at diets in terms of process of elimination. What we do know about the diets that are available to us is that the Western diet, which is characterized by high intakes of red meats, refined grains, unhealthy fats, and sugar, is associated with poorer health outcomes. In contrast, the Mediterranean diet, which has whole grains, healthy fats, fruits, veggies, is associated with better health outcomes. And in terms of neurological health, it has been associated with a lower risk for dementia and possibly Parkinson's disease. It's proposed to have a beneficial effect on the gut microbiota, where an imbalance of bacteria has been a proposed mechanism for neuroinflammation, which we know is one of the focuses in MSA. And so, out of the diets out there, we feel that at this time, the Mediterranean diet is really the best diet for us. And so, this is something that I talk about a lot in our clinic. And here's a visual depiction of what the Mediterranean diet looks like on the right. But basically, it highlights eating plenty of fruits and veggies and whole grains, focusing on good sources of protein. So, things like fatty fish, so salmon and tuna, and then our leaner proteins like turkey and chicken. We really want to limit red meats and concentrated sweets. So, sodas, cookies, cakes, ice cream, that sort of thing. Now, I don't have time to go into all the specifics of the Mediterranean diet, but I would be happy to provide that information for you. I will put my contact information at the end of the presentation. Now, getting into symptom management, I first want to focus on managing swallowing difficulty, fatigue, and unintentional weight loss. As I mentioned before, swallowing difficulty is common in MSA, and about one-third of MSAP patients suffer from severe dysphagia. It's important to note that, when you think of swallowing difficulty, you typically think of what's happening in the throat, but this can actually be something that's happening in the mouth as well. So if you have difficulty moving food around in your mouth, or if you feel like you're pocketing food, kind of holding food in your mouth longer than you need to be, that might indicate some swallowing difficulty. This can result in longer meal times and poor intake. It can also increase your risk for aspiration or choking, which can lead to pneumonia and death. So, one of the important team members when it comes to evaluating swallowing function is called a speech language pathologist. They can look at your swallow and help develop personalized strategies that might include diet modifications and positioning techniques. So, once an SLP has recommended the right type of food that you need to be eating in terms of texture, then we can work together to figure out how do we meet your nutrition needs through this new type of diet that you're probably not used to. So when we change the texture, moisture, and consistency of foods, that might help make them a little bit easier to swallow. And I always recommend opting for easy to chew foods if you feel like you're getting really fatigued with chewing or you're just spending a lot of time on chewing foods. There's different things that you might need. So kitchen equipment like a blender or a food processor can help you puree, mince, and chop foods. We also talk about cooking methods. So using something that's going to cook foods really soft, like sous vide. I recommend this for meats. It's where you heat the food at a low temperature for an extended period of time. It's really good at retaining moisture and flavor. So when we think of tougher meats, this is a great way to cook those. We'll also recommend using sauces and gravies to add moistures to foods. Now, you don't have to be a chef to change the texture of the foods you eat. There are also store-bought texture modified foods that we eat on an everyday basis. So things like fish, that might be an easier piece of meat to eat. They tend to be softer. Ground meats, scrambled eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, these are all great sources of protein. Low sodium soups might be a bit easier, and if the chunky bits are a bit harder for you, you can always throw that in the blender. When it comes to fruit, things like applesauce, bananas, avocados, and canned fruits might be easier. And then in terms of vegetables, mashed potatoes is always a go-to. And then I also recommend just cooking your vegetables really soft. You might cook them a little bit longer than they need to be. Usually steaming is a good method for that. Oatmeal is also a good texture modified food. So, looking at foods that you might need to use extra caution with, anything that's dry and crumbly, so bread, crackers, those might choke you up a little bit. Foods with husk, peels, and pulp, so things like beans, peas, oranges, any type of food that has that extra component that might be a little bit harder to blend up or chew. Sticky foods, so nut butters, jellies, gummies, those might tend to stick a little bit more and cause you to get a little choked up. Now, this is very individualized, so you might find that you can tolerate peanut butter okay. And then tough and fibrous foods. So raw vegetables are typically going to be harder fruits like melons, and then tough cuts of meat. So steak is probably not going to be the best go-to when it comes to a protein source. If you find that it's hard to swallow thin liquids like water, you might use a thickener. This should only be used if it's recommended for you because it can increase your risk for choking if it's not the right product for you. But there are different commercial products, so things that you can find in the grocery store. Here's an example of a dairy product. There's an apple juice. They also sell different like packets that you can add to beverages that you drink at home to help thicken them up. And then you can also make texture or thickened beverages at home. So thinking of a smoothie, if you were to freeze a banana and throw that in with some milk, that might give you a bit of a thicker beverage. And then finally, when it comes to swallowing difficulty, we want to think about our environment and if there's anything that we can change there. So I always recommend sitting upright while we eat. A speech language pathologist can really help with positioning techniques, something like a chin tuck that allows you to swallow a bit more efficiently. Taking small bites and eating slowly can help. And then limiting distractions. So instead of sitting in front of the TV or having your phone out, really want you to focus on what you're eating so we can make sure that you are swallowing safely. Now, I've grouped fatigue and unintentional weight loss together because the strategies that we use for these are really going to overlap. So, when it comes to unintentional weight loss and fatigue, meal timing is going to be really important. If you find that sitting down for 3 big meals a day is just really too much to handle, I recommend smaller, frequent, calorie dense meals and snacks. So, aiming for 5 to 6 small meals and snacks throughout the day. And that might look something like this. Instead of these 3 big meals, you have 3 smaller meals and snacks in between. So this gives you more opportunities to eat throughout the day without you necessarily having to eat a significant amount of food at one meal. If you're experiencing weight loss, you're probably not eating enough calories. And so if you're burning more calories than you're eating, we really want to see how can we add calories to your diet without you having to eat a whole lot more food. And we do that by adding healthy fats into the diet. These are really nutrient dense, so you don't necessarily have to sit down for a huge meal, but we can add calories to the foods that you're already eating. You can use gravies, sauces, creams, olive oils, butter, and you might do something like use a spread, so like avocado or hummus on a sandwich instead of just having a plain sandwich. If you're doing something like a soup or a chowder, you could add heavy whipping cream or sour cream. That increases the calories there, and then you're still eating probably the same amount of food. And then I always recommend drizzling some olive oil or butter on your favorite vegetables. So about a tablespoon of olive oil has 120 calories. So you're still able to, eat that same portion of vegetables, but you're getting a bit more calories with it. Now, if you're losing weight, we really want to make sure that you are not losing your muscle mass. So focus on eating plenty of protein to help maintain that muscle mass, strength, and immune function. There are lots of protein sources out there, and we've talked about a few of them. So lean meats, fish, beans, legumes, lentils, eggs, yogurt, milk, cheese, nuts, seeds. There are many more. But if you are having chewing or swallowing difficulty along with the weight loss, I recommend focusing on those softer proteins like we talked about earlier. Now, commercial nutrition drinks can help add protein and calories to your diet. I recommend working with your dietitian to help figure out the best product for you because there are so many out there on the shelves. I typically recommend a plus product, so something like an Ensure Plus, a Boost Plus, or even an Equate Plus. They typically have a good amount of calories and protein, but again, your dietitian can recommend the best product for you. Now, if you find that swallowing difficulty becomes overly burdensome, and that you're losing weight and you're just not able to meet your nutrition needs, we do have the option for nutrition support. So, a feeding tube can help you meet your nutrition and hydration needs without having to eat by mouth. There are a couple of things that we look at when we consider a feeding tube. So, again, if you're unable to meet your nutrition needs through your diet, this is typically going to be evidenced by weight loss. So, if you're losing a lot of weight, that indicates that you might not be meeting your nutrition needs. If you have swallowing difficulty, that's really limiting the amount and types of food that you can eat. And then if you have increased mealtime burden, so maybe you're feeling really anxious about eating, it's taking you a long time to eat, and you're feeling very fatigued when you eat, it might be time to consider nutrition support. I'll go over a few benefits and risk of getting a feeding tube. So the feeding tube can be used for hydration. So if you're not able to drink enough water throughout the day, we can do water through the feeding tube. It can be used for medications if you find that taking medications becomes more difficult, and it can be used for nutrition. It can also help reduce the mealtime burden. So if you are feeling anxious and fatigued with meals, this can kind of take that away because you can get the nutrition you need through the tube. Now, a lot of people think that once you get a feeding tube, you're not able to eat by mouth. And typically, it's on a case by case basis, but if you are still safe to swallow, you might be able to eat foods by mouth still. Some people will, get half of their calories from their diet and then half of it from their tube feeding formula. Some might just have pleasure feeds. So just being able to eat whatever you want, as you feel like, and not having to worry about whether or not you're getting enough nutrition. The risk, it's typically an outpatient procedure, but your healthcare team can help you understand risks that are specific to you because it is going to depend on your medical background. I have an image over here that shows what a typical feeding tube looks like. So typically, they will enter through your abdomen into your stomach, and there's a little tube that comes out here that you're able to put the formula in. Now, these are examples of what tube feeding formula you might use. There's all kinds out there. The dietitian will help you figure out which one is going to be best for you. But I always tell people it's kind of like a protein shake that you would find on the shelves at the store. Now, it's not exactly the same. This is made especially for feeding tubes, but that's what it looks like. It's a carton. It's got formula that you just put through the tube, and you're able to do your feedings a couple times throughout the day, typically. The next few areas I want to talk about are managing blood pressure, constipation, and delayed gastric emptying. So, just an overview of where these symptoms are originating from. The autonomic nervous system controls our unconscious body processes, so things like breathing and heart rate. And studies have found that autonomic dysfunction greatly reduces our quality and quantity of life. There are different types. So, cardiovascular dysfunction is characterized by orthostatic hypotension and supine hypertension. Urinary dysfunction, so overactive bladder or incomplete bladder emptying. Sexual dysfunction, so decreased sexual desire or erectile dysfunction. And then GI dysfunction, which is characterized by delayed gastric emptying and constipation. There are nutrition strategies that we can really use to help with the cardiovascular and the GI side of things. I'll start with orthostatic hypotension, which is low blood pressure that occurs after standing from a sitting or lying down position. So, the way that we approach this from a nutrition standpoint is by increasing blood volume. And we can do that by increasing our salt and fluid intake. So, as far as salt goes, we recommend at least 2 to 3 grams a day and up to 6 to 10 grams. And then for fluid, at least 2 to 3 liters a day. And we also recommend limiting sugary beverages. Now, if you have a history of cardiac conditions, this can impact the amount of salt and fluid that you might need. So it's really important to talk to your healthcare team to figure out, what is that recommendation for you. So how do we apply this to our everyday lives? So, as far as the fluid goes, I recommend starting your day with a glass of water. There are studies that show about 2 cups of water before you get up in the morning can help raise your blood pressure and help kickstart those medications. I recommend setting a timer as a reminder to drink fluids throughout the day. And then you can also use a 0 calorie flavor enhancer in your water, so something like a Crystal Light, to make that fluid a little bit more exciting because water can get boring after a while. To increase your salt intake, I recommend salt tabs. Some people do salt tabs, but it causes abdominal discomfort in some people. So if you want to focus more on what you can do as far as your food intake goes, looking for high sodium foods like canned items and highly processed foods, although I would use those sparingly. When we think of highly processed foods, we're thinking of things like crackers. Um, they can be higher in unhealthy fats, so just something to keep in mind there. Now, if you want to get kind of a twofer here, if you want to increase your fluid and your salt intake, I recommend drinking broths. So, like chicken broth, it's high in sodium and you're getting fluids there. Drinking electrolyte or sports drinks, so things like Powerade, Gatorade, just be careful with the sugar in there. I might opt for a 0 calorie one. And then adding electrolytes to your water. So there's all kinds of electrolyte packets out there. One that comes to mind is Liquid IV, but I'm not promoting any kind of products here, just things that you might see on the shelf. So any kind of electrolyte powder that you can add to water can help increase your salt intake too. Now, if you struggle with postprandial hypotension, this is low blood pressure that occurs after eating a meal. And so, what we can do from a nutrition standpoint, it is shown that larger meals contribute to more postprandial hypotension. So, avoiding large meals, reducing the carbohydrate load of meals, lowering the food temperatures, and reducing your alcohol intake can all help manage this. So, what does that look like in your everyday diet? Eating small meals and snacks frequently. So, we talked about the 5 to 6 smaller meals and snacks when we were thinking about unintentional weight loss. That's something that applies here as well. So, we still want you to get all the nutrition you need, but instead of doing 3 big meals, kind of spacing those out throughout the day. To reduce the carbohydrate load of your meals, you can use the plate method or carbohydrate counting, and I will show you the plate method here in just a moment. But the carbohydrate limit at meals is kind of unclear. They do recommend a lower carbohydrate load at meals, but there's not really a limit. There's a study that suggests less than 65 grams of carbohydrates per meal is kind of that threshold. So I'll show you here what the plate method looks like. And I use this for patients that have diabetes to help manage carbohydrates at meals, but it's a great resource for anyone that's really looking to build balanced meals. So basically, you fill half of your plate with non-starchy vegetables. So something like broccoli, onions, um, peppers, mushrooms, those sorts of things. 1/4 of your plate with your protein portion. You can see that in the top right-hand corner. And then 1/4 with your carbohydrate foods. Now, these are the ones that, again, we want to kind of monitor when it comes to postprandial hypotension. So your carbohydrate foods are things like bread, rice, pasta. Some of your veggies have carbs or a lot more carbs than others. So things like potatoes and corn. And then anything that has sugar is going to have carbs as well. So just something to keep in mind, kind of limiting that carbohydrate portion at meals can help manage the postprandial hypotension. Now, constipation is something that I talk a lot about in our clinic. It's very common with neurological diseases. So, just kind of getting into it, the symptoms of constipation might include fewer than 3 bowel movements per week, having hard or lumpy stools. If you feel like you're straining to have a bowel movement, that could indicate constipation. A sense of incomplete evacuation, so you're not having a satisfying bowel movement, or a sensation of an anorectal obstruction. So, different things that can kind of indicate constipation here. And a lot of times, what we see is called slow transit constipation, where your bowel's just not moving as efficiently as it should, and that stool just stays in there and it becomes hard and dry over time, and it makes it just even more harder to move throughout the bowel. So, our goal is to reduce the gut transit time and to increase the fecal weight. And we do this by making sure that you're drinking plenty of fluids, that you're eating enough fiber and the right types of fiber. We can remove any aggravating factors, so things like pain medications might lead to a bit more constipation. And then, if we need to, we might look at fiber supplements and medications. This little tidbit here, more than 90% of women and 97% of men do not meet recommended intakes of dietary fiber. And more than 85% of adults underconsume fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, which are our main sources of fiber in the diet. The dietary guidelines for Americans recommends about 25 grams of fiber daily for men and women over the age of 30 years. Now, you might need a little more, just depending on, your height, your weight, all kinds of things that play into that recommendation. I'll go over the fiber sources in our diets. So again, most people are not eating enough fiber. So the first thing that I talk about is how much fiber are you getting? Where can we add more? What types of fiber do you need? So here are those three main sources in our diet. Whole grains, we recommend on the Mediterranean diet, 3 to 6 servings daily. So things like brown rice, whole wheat bread, oatmeal, popcorn, pasta, cereals, those sorts of things. Fruits is something that we talk a lot about in our clinic because we've seen that it really helps with our patients. So 2 to 3 cups daily is what we recommend. There is a study looking at fruit and how it helps with constipation and looking at different types of fruit and how they might help with the symptoms. So that study found that prunes, apple fiber isolate, and raisins can really increase the fecal weight, but kiwi fruit increases the fecal water content and reduced gut transit time in constipated patients. So it has a certain type of fiber that's really good at holding on to fluid in the stool that can help it move through a bit more efficiently. And this image on the right here kind of breaks down the different types of things that are in fruit that are thought to help with constipation. So we have the dietary fiber, which we know, the polyphenols, and the sorbitol. And so when it comes to whether or not you should eat whole fruit versus fruit juice or just fruit skins, I always recommend a whole fruit because, as you can see in the middle here, with whole fruits, you're really getting a good balance of dietary fiber, polyphenols, and the sorbitol. When it comes to juicing fruits, you're really missing out on all that fiber that you could be getting from the whole fruit. So 2 to 3 cups a day. Kiwi is one of our top tier fruits there when it comes to constipation. Vegetables are also great for fiber. 2 servings daily is what we recommend, and focusing on a good variety. I typically tell patients to aim for 15 different vegetables per week. And when we think of variety, we think of different colors. You really want all of the vegetables in the rainbow. When we have different colors and different types of vegetables, we're getting a good mix of different vitamins and minerals. Moving on to delayed gastric emptying. This is also called gastroparesis. So it's slow stomach emptying or digestion in the absence of a mechanical obstruction. And it may be present even in the early stages of the disease. So some symptoms to look out for are nausea, vomiting, early satiety, bloating, and upper abdominal pain. So if the food is just not able to move through your system as efficiently as it should, it can lead to these symptoms. And there are some nutrition strategies that we can use to really help with, a faster digestion. So, a small particle, low fat diet is what we talk about. A low fiber diet was traditionally recommended, but newer research is showing that soluble fibers may be useful in helping move digestion along. But we still kind of do want to look at the fiber in the diet because we do know that fiber can slow down digestion. Liquids can be used if the solids are not tolerated. So, if solid meals cause you more discomfort, having more liquid meals like a smoothie or a soup, puree, or something like that can help ease those symptoms. And then oral nutrition supplements, so things like protein drinks. If you feel like you're just not able to get enough of the nutrients from your diet, these are usually better tolerated than solid foods. So, some more information about gastroparesis nutrition therapy. Again, small frequent meals is going to be key here, so that you don't give your stomach so much to digest at one time. Having a smaller meal can really help. We recommend chewing your foods well so that you can do some of the work so your stomach doesn't have to. If you're able to chew up that food really well, your stomach has a smaller particle to break down once it gets to the stomach. Limit fried and greasy foods. This can increase the gut transit time. So you might find that fried foods kind of increase those symptoms of nausea and bloating and that sort of thing. Opting for low fat products in that same light, opting for softer fruits. So things that are a bit softer, even your vegetables, I recommend cooking soft. That way it's just a little easier for your stomach to digest. Pureeing foods when necessary. And then I recommend being careful with skins and seeds. Those can be really high in fiber, so those might slow down gastric emptying as well. Here's an example of what that diet might look like. So instead of having a meal with steak and salad, which is raw vegetables, and potatoes that are fried, you might do something that is a little softer. So for your protein portion, doing something like an oven baked salmon, instead of those fried potatoes, maybe doing a low fat mashed potato. And then instead of that raw salad, great option otherwise. But if you have trouble digesting those raw vegetables, opting for something that's cooked a bit softer. So some soft carrots and soft broccoli. I know we've covered a lot today and it can be a lot to remember. So if you have any questions, if you want any additional resources, here's my contact information and you are welcome to email me. Again, we talked about the Mediterranean diet, which I wasn't able to get into, but I have a really great handout that breaks down the Mediterranean diet. So if you would like that, just shoot me an email and I can send that over to you. I also want to highlight my references because my nutrition recommendations would not be possible without all the great research that's being done. I hope I've given you some nutrition tips that you can use, and thank you so much for allowing me to speak today.
Okay, and we will now go into the live Q&A with Emily. I believe she is here. Hello, Emily. Thank you so much for that presentation. We have gotten a lot of questions, so I'm just going to jump right in for you if that's okay. Awesome. Okay, so I crave salt. I also have low blood pressure. So can I indulge in my craving?
I would say speak with your healthcare team before you make any of those changes because I don't know your situation specifically, but I would say likely you probably could increase your salt intake.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Some of my weight loss is because of my lack of muscle tone that I used to have. Is this a normal occurrence? And is there a food service or an online program that you recommend for meals? In my house, food is love, and I used to always cook, but it's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I do see muscle loss just with this condition. And that can kind of roll over into weight loss because our muscles do weigh a good bit. So that's something that we can kind of take a look at in clinic. There's different physical indicators that we can use to see where you have lost muscle and how that might translate into weight loss. As far as foods go, I know that, not being able to prepare foods as well as you might have used to can really impact your nutrition quality of life. There are different meal services that deliver ingredients to your doorstep where you can kind of put those together with the help of your family, possibly. There's also different levels to those kinds of services. So some of them have the foods already prepared and it just comes with instructions on how to put those in the oven. There are also lots of grocery stores these days have recipe services where you can go on their app and look for certain recipes and automatically add those items to your cart. So there are a bunch of different resources out there.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Okay, so this is a two-part question about drinks such as Boost. One, are these drinks a good option when concerned about nutrition in general? And then the second part to that question is, can these drinks negatively high protein content of these drinks impact digestion, specifically causing constipation?
Yeah, those are great questions. So, yes, the nutrition supplements can help us when you're not able to meet your nutrition needs through your diet alone. They are supplements, so they're meant to be added to your diet and not necessarily something that you rely on for all of your nutrition, unless we do have a situation like a feeding tube. They are full of vitamins and minerals, so they can really help there. And yes, they do have a lot of protein. There are a bunch of different products out there. Some of them have lower protein, some have higher, some have lower calories, some higher. So it's good to work with a dietitian that can really recommend the right one for you. In terms of high protein content and constipation, yes, if you eat too much protein and you don't have plenty of fluid and fiber in your diet, that can contribute to constipation. So that's something that your healthcare team can help you monitor.
Great. Next question is optimal alcohol zero.
How much alcohol we should drink?
Yeah.
So on the Mediterranean diet, if you already drink alcohol, we recommend opting for red wine. And so for men, the limit would be about 2 glasses a day. And then for women, the limit would be 1 glass a day. Now, I always talk to my patients, especially patients that do have some, difficulty with movement and things like that, because alcohol can impair our movements a bit more. It can impair our thinking. So that's something that's really individualized. Now, if you don't drink alcohol, I'm not going to recommend that you start. So that's where that recommendation is.
Great. Next question. MSA caused a change in my mom's taste buds. She does not like the taste of egg yolk, garlic, and meat anymore. Is that normal and common?
Yes, I do see taste changes a lot in our clinic. Unfortunately, that can take a lot of the joy out of the foods that we used to love if we can't really taste them all that much. When this is an issue, I always like to look at different food groups. So can you taste sweeter foods a bit more than saltier foods or vice versa? And try to figure out what foods you can still enjoy. If you completely cannot taste anything, I recommend changing up the textures of the foods if you are able to, just to give it a little bit more variety.
Great. They say Celtic salt is different and better for you. How is it different for keeping up your blood pressure?
So there are different types of salt out there, but they all have pretty much the same sodium content. So when it comes to blood pressure, it has the same effect as regular salt that you would, like your processed salt. The different types of salt are usually marketed as being from certain areas of the world or being processed differently. So that's where that differentiation comes in.
Awesome. And then where does tofu fit in a diet?
It fits. It's a protein. It's one of our plant proteins. So definitely a great source of protein. And it's something that I recommend if you like tofu.
Great. Is the fiber content of fruits and veggies damaged in any way if we puree them for ease of swallowing?
No, you are still getting the fiber from that fruit and veggie. The only time that you mess with the fiber content is when you're juicing it because you're leaving all of that pulp behind.
Great. Um, okay, another question. Every once in a while, I experience an invoice loss of stool. Otherwise, I am happily regular. How do you prevent this type of excitement?
We would first need to figure out what the underlying cause is because there can be different things that go into that. From a nutrition standpoint, I would go over your diet with you and see if there's any trends. So maybe there are certain foods that cause more upset than others, and we might limit those in your diet. But I would definitely work with your healthcare team if you are experiencing that issue and it's really affecting your quality of life, because they can really get down, to the bottom of that and help you with strategies there.
Right. And then another question, are there any supplements that can help with my digestion and nutritional intake?
Yeah, there are. Are we talking about like nutrition shakes or?
I think so.
Okay. I'll just go over. So nutrition shakes, yes, they can help. Again, I would recommend working with your dietitian to see which one would work for you. In terms of helping with digestion, if you're having issues digesting solid foods, so if you have delayed gastric emptying, some liquid nutrition supplements can help with that. In terms of vitamins and minerals, I always recommend having a supplement, especially if you are deficient in any vitamins and minerals. So yeah, definitely working with your healthcare team and seeing what they recommend specifically for you.
And we actually just had another question, I think, based off of that question. What about probiotics?
Yeah, they're good for helping maintain the gut bacteria. So some people find relief with their constipation if they include a probiotic. Some people don't. It's very individualized. So if that's something that you want to try out, there are food sources of probiotics. So things like Greek yogurt, kimchi, those sorts of things.
Awesome. And then I have a question here that just says dried prunes question mark. I'm assuming if they're asking if it's good.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm sure most people are familiar with prunes when it comes to constipation. They can help. So dried prunes, for sure, they have more of a bulking effect for the stool.
Awesome. And then we have one more question. Are there fiber-rich foods that are easier to digest with my condition?
So I'm assuming we're talking about the delayed gastric emptying where it's a bit harder to digest certain foods. So in the past, we would recommend a low fiber diet, but that's a little difficult when you have constipation as well. So, newer research is looking at the benefits of leaning more into the soluble fibers. So, like I was talking about with the fruits. So, yeah, there might be easier fibers in that regard. So, eating something like a kiwi versus eating something like a whole grain toast might be a little bit easier.
Awesome. And then we have a couple questions asking for your email in the presentation. So I can answer that for you. We are recording this, and we will put all of her resources that she had in her presentation online on our resource library, when this is posted, probably within the next week, if not sooner. But as far as the other questions, it looks like we got to all of them. So thank you so much, Emily, for joining. And I hope everyone enjoyed that session.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for having me.
Yeah.